Some wounds don't heal with time. They wait, patient as winter, beneath the skin reminders of promises broken and battles lost. In a forgotten workshop on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, an old engineer's hands move with practiced precision over blueprints that should not exist. Technology the world isn't ready for. Technology that could change everything. Across town, a teenage girl stares at pointe shoes gathering dust on a shelf, her reflection in the mirror cut in half by a wheelchair she never expected to call her own. Dreams don't die easily, but they fade when starved of hope. Two strangers connected by invisible threads of fate and science, one seeking redemption for past failures, the other desperate to reclaim what was stolen. Neither aware that their collision course was engineered by powerful men who calculate human suffering as acceptable collateral damage. They say everything can be fixed with the right tools and enough heart, but some breaks run deeper than bone. And some leaps require faith when the landing can't be seen. The water was rising faster than Frank Calloway had anticipated. Through the submerged window of the sinking sedan, he could see the terrified face of 8-year-old Joey Peterson, eyes wide with panic as the murky lake water climbed past his chest. The boy's mother had already been pulled to safety by first responders, but Joey remained trapped by a jammed seatbelt mechanism. "Hold on, kid," Frank muttered, more to himself than the child who couldn't hear him through the glass. At 65, Frank's body protested as he positioned the hydraulic cutter he designed years ago for just such emergencies. The metal frame groaned as the specialized blades bit into the doorframe, sending a shower of bubbles rising to the surface of Lake Carnegie. The November chill had already numbed Frank's hands, but decades of mechanical precision guided his movements. With a final surge of pressure, the door broke free. Frank reached in, sliced through the seatbelt with a ceramic blade, and pulled Joey from the flooding vehicle just as water engulfed the interior completely. Kicking hard against the weight of his waterlogged clothes and the struggling child, Frank propelled them upward toward the fading afternoon light. They broke the surface with twin gasps. Paramedics waded into the shallows to receive the boy, while Frank remained in the water a moment longer, catching his breath and fighting the familiar ache that radiated from his lower back, a permanent souvenir from his NASA days. "You're crazy, Calloway," Police Chief Martinez said, extending a hand to help the soaking man to shore. "Jumping into a freezing lake at your age? You trying to join your wife ahead of schedule?" Frank accepted the hand but not the sentiment. "My age is precisely why I don't have time to stand around waiting for your dive team." Wrapped in an emergency blanket, Frank limped toward his battered 1987 Ford pickup, ignoring the small crowd of onlookers and their smartphones capturing his reluctant heroism. He'd be on the local news again, something he'd managed to avoid for nearly 6 months. The rescue brought it all back: the heat, the screams, the twisted metal. Cape Canaveral, 1986. Not the shuttle disaster that captured the world's attention, but a smaller, classified accident that the public never knew about. Frank closed his eyes as he settled into his truck's worn driver's seat, but that only made the memories sharper. The experimental module had been Frank's design, a mobility enhancement system for zero-gravity repairs. When the oxygen line ruptured, the ensuing fire spread faster than anyone predicted. Frank had pulled 3 colleagues from the inferno, but James Woodward, his closest friend since MIT, had been trapped beneath a collapsed support beam. "Leave me," James had insisted, blood streaking his face. "It's going to blow. Frank, get out." But Frank had refused, working frantically to free his friend even as security personnel tried to drag him away. When the secondary explosion came, Frank was still there, still trying. He survived. James didn't. The familiar pain in Frank's lower back intensified as he pulled into the gravel driveway of his workshop on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Callaway Mechanical Solutions read the weather-beaten sign, with no solicitors, salesmen, or stupid questions, hand-painted below in fading red letters. The converted barn housed both his business and home hydraulic lifts and precision machinery sharing space with a modest living area in the loft above. After Martha's death 5 years ago, Frank had sold their suburban house and moved permanently into the workshop. It simplified things. Inside, he stripped off his wet clothes and stood under a hot shower until the shivering stopped, then swallowed 2 prescription pain pills with a glass of bourbon, a combination his doctor had explicitly warned against. The pills were for the physical pain. The bourbon was for everything else. Clean, dry, and marginally warmer. Frank descended to the workshop floor and approached the locked door at the far end. The electronic keypad recognized his fingerprint, and the reinforced door slid open to reveal his true passion, a laboratory filled with half-finished inventions and prototypes that would never see mass production. Martha's photograph watched over the space from a simple frame on the main workbench. She was caught mid-laugh during their 30th anniversary trip to Cape Cod, her silver-streaked hair blowing in the ocean breeze. "Had to go swimming today," he told the photograph, his voice echoing in the empty workshop. "Some kid drove into the lake with his mother. You'd have liked him, reminded me of our Jimmy at that age." The silence that followed such one-sided conversations never got easier. Frank activated the main computer terminal, and holographic schematics bloomed in the air before him, the project that had consumed him for the past 18 months. An exoskeletal mobility system, far more sophisticated than anything publicly available. It incorporated neural interface technology that NASA had deemed too experimental, too dangerous for their purposes back in the 90s. "Let's try the hip joint calibration again," he muttered, making minute adjustments to the design floating before him. "If I reduce the servo response delay by another 3 milliseconds, the work absorbed him completely, as it always did. When the perimeter alarm chimed at 9:47 p.m., Frank was genuinely startled. The security monitor showed a black Mercedes SUV approaching his gate, headlights slicing through the light November snowfall that had begun while he worked. Frank's first instinct was to ignore it. The gate was locked, and his no trespassing signs weren't subtle. But something about the deliberate way the vehicle moved, cautious but determined, piqued his curiosity. He switched on the external microphone. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow." The driver's window lowered, revealing a woman's face, partially illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Frank Calloway. It's Eleanor Reed. I need to speak with you." Frank froze, his hand hovering over the intercom button. Eleanor Reed, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in over 30 years, though he'd seen it in medical journals and, more recently, in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette when she was appointed executive director of St. Mercy Hospital. "It's important," she added when he didn't respond. "And it's snowing. At least let me pull in." Against his better judgment, Frank pressed the gate release. The Mercedes proceeded slowly up the drive and parked beside his pickup. Frank watched on the monitor as Eleanor emerged from the vehicle, her posture as straight and confident as he remembered. Her once chestnut hair was now silver, cut in an elegant bob that framed features that had grown more distinguished with age. She wasn't alone. From the passenger side emerged a teenage girl in a wheelchair, bundled against the cold in a puffy winter coat. Even through the grainy security feed, Frank could see the girl's striking resemblance to a younger Eleanor. Frank quickly closed the secure lab and tidied away the bourbon bottle before opening the main workshop door. The cold air rushed in, carrying snowflakes and memories equally unwelcome. "Dr. Reed," he said formally, standing aside to let them enter. "Quite a surprise." Eleanor guided the wheelchair over the threshold. "It's been a long time. Frank, this is my daughter, Madison." The girl looked up at him with undisguised curiosity. She had Eleanor's high cheekbones and determined chin, but her eyes were a striking blue that Frank didn't recognize. "You're the man who jumped into the lake today," Madison said. "It's all over Instagram." Frank grunted non-committally and closed the door behind them. "What brings Pittsburgh's premier medical administrator to my doorstep at this hour?" Eleanor removed her gloves deliberately, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "We need your help, though I'll admit this wasn't my first choice." "Charming as always, Ellie." "It's Eleanor now," she corrected him smoothly. "And this isn't a social call." Frank gestured toward the small sitting area he maintained for the occasional client meeting. Then let's get to the point. As they settled, Frank noted how Madison's eyes roamed the workshop, taking in the organized chaos of tools, parts, and projects in various stages of completion. There was genuine interest in her gaze, not the bored indifference typical of teenagers. Madison was in an accident 9 months ago, Eleanor began, her clinical tone belying the subject matter. A school bus rollover on the turnpike. She sustained a T10, T12 spinal cord injury. Frank looked at the girl, who met his gaze unflinchingly. I'm sorry to hear that. Mom, please don't do the doctor thing, Madison interjected. I was on my way to the National Youth Ballet competition in New York. Our bus driver fell asleep or had a seizure or something. Bus went off the road, rolled 3 times. I was sitting on the side that hit the guardrail. 2 fractured vertebrae, spinal cord damage. She delivered the facts with practiced detachment. I was supposed to dance Odette in our studio's spring showcase. Now I watch from the audience. Frank nodded, respecting the girl's directness. And you're here because... Eleanor leaned forward. I've consulted 17 specialists across the country. The most advanced treatments, experimental procedures, rehabilitation protocols, nothing has succeeded in restoring Madison's mobility below the injury site. I'm not a doctor, Frank reminded her. And last I checked, you made it very clear what you thought about my approach to medical problems. A flash of irritation crossed Eleanor's face. That was 35 years ago. Frank, we were different people. Were we... Madison cleared her throat loudly. Could you two pause the ancient history channel, Mom? Just show him... Eleanor withdrew a tablet from her handbag and handed it to Frank. On screen was a technical article about mobility assistance exoskeletons, with a particular focus on neural interface technology. His own name appeared in the references section, citing classified work from his NASA days. Where did you get this? Frank asked sharply. I have colleagues at DARPA, Eleanor replied. They tell me you were decades ahead of your time with the neural response system you developed for the Artemis project. Frank handed the tablet back abruptly. Classified work that ended with people dead and my career at NASA finished. Not exactly a glowing recommendation. It ended because of budget cuts and politics, Eleanor countered. And because you refused to compromise on safety protocols. You've done your homework. That's why I'm here. Frank, the current medical mobility systems are crude compared to what you were developing even back then. They're heavy, slow, and they don't truly respond to neural impulses, they just follow program patterns. Frank stood and walked to the window, watching the snow accumulate on the driveway. And you think I can do better based on work I did 30 years ago? I think you already are doing better, Eleanor said quietly. Your secured lab isn't as secret as you think. You've been ordering specialized components that only make sense for neural interface technology. Custom fabricated carbon nanotube sensors, miniaturized servo motors with response times under 5 milliseconds. Frank turned, anger flashing in his eyes. You've been monitoring my purchases. Mom has a friend at the FDA, Madison explained, rolling her eyes. They track specialized medical components. That's borderline illegal, Frank growled. So is developing unregistered medical devices. Eleanor countered, but I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because Madison deserves a chance to walk again, to dance again. What she deserves and what's possible aren't always the same thing, Frank said, softening slightly as he looked at the girl. The medical establishment has written you off. Madison nodded. In nicer words, focus on adapting to your new normal. There are many ways to express yourself artistically. That kind of bull, Madison. Eleanor warned. It's true, Madison insisted. They've all given up, except Mom, who's apparently willing to track down her ex-boyfriend from the Stone Age on the off chance he's secretly building superlegs in his barn. Frank couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth. The girl had spirit. I'm not building super legs, and your mother and I were hardly... Please, Frank, Eleanor interrupted. a rare note of vulnerability in her voice. Just look at her case. If you tell me there's nothing you can do, we'll leave and never bother you again. Frank studied Eleanor's face, seeing beneath the composed exterior to the desperate mother beneath. He remembered why he had fallen for her all those decades ago, her fierce determination, her unwillingness to accept defeat when it came to things that mattered. But he also remembered how it ended her ultimate trust in established systems and protocols, her rejection of his more unorthodox approaches. The difference between us, she had said during their final argument, is that I understand the value of working within the system to change it. You just want to blow it up and start over. Now here she was, having exhausted all conventional options, turning to the man who wanted to blow up the system. The irony wasn't lost on him. I'll look at her medical files, Frank conceded finally. But I'm not promising anything. Relief washed over Eleanor's face. Thank you. I've prepared a complete... I don't want them from you. Frank interrupted. Have Madison bring them tomorrow. Alone. Eleanor's relief transformed instantly to concern. That's not appropriate. Madison is a minor. And, Mom, Madison cut in. I'm 16, not 6. Mister, Calloway saved a kid from a sinking car today. I think I'll be safe in his workshop. That's not the point. Madison, there are proper channels, Frank finished for her, like the 17 specialists who told you nothing could be done. Those proper channels. Eleanor's lips thinned, but Madison pressed her advantage. I'll bring the files tomorrow after school, and Mom will be in surgery all afternoon, so it works out perfectly. Frank saw the calculations running behind Eleanor's eyes, weighing proper protocol against her daughter's best interest, just as she had always balanced innovation against established practice. Fine, she relented finally, but I'll be calling to check in. As they prepared to leave, Madison maneuvered her wheelchair with practiced efficiency. At the door, she paused and looked back at Frank. Why do you want to see me alone? Frank appreciated her directness. Because I need to know if you really want this, or if it's just your mother's crusade. Neural interface technology requires absolute commitment from the user. It's not something that can be forced or done halfway. Madison nodded slowly. Makes sense. See you tomorrow. Mr. Calloway. After they left, Frank returned to his secure lab, but found himself unable to focus on the schematics. Instead, he pulled up a browser on his computer and searched for Madison Reed Ballet. The video showed a different girl, entirely graceful, powerful, and utterly in command of her body as she danced variations from Swan Lake and Giselle. The timestamp on the most recent performance was just 10 months ago. Frank sank heavily into his chair, the weight of what he was considering pressing down on him. He opened the bottom drawer of his workbench and removed a worn leather journal, Martha's research notes from her years studying the biomechanics of dancers at Juilliard. What do you think, Martha? He asked the empty room. Am I crazy to even consider this? The only answer was the soft hiss of the heating system and the distant memory of his wife's voice. The greatest tragedy isn't failing, Frank. It's never trying. Madison arrived at precisely 3:30 p.m. the next day, navigating her wheelchair through the light dusting of snow that remained on Frank's driveway. She carried a backpack slung over the chair's handles and a determined expression that reminded Frank of Eleanor in her younger days. Mom called ahead to make sure you were expecting me, she announced as Frank held the door. She also ran a background check on you last night. Frank raised an eyebrow. And apparently you used to have top secret clearance and have never even had a parking ticket, Madison replied, wheeling past him into the workshop. Though she's concerned about the number of pain medications you're prescribed. Your mother always did believe in thorough research. Madison positioned her chair near the workbench and unzipped her backpack. I brought the medical files, plus videos of me dancing before the accident, and footage of my current physical therapy sessions. She paused in studying him. Mom doesn't know about the last part. The therapists think I've plateaued. Frank accepted the external hard drive she offered. And what do you think? I think they're afraid to give me false hope. Madison's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing the raw pain beneath. Everyone's so careful about managing my expectations that they've stopped having any expectations at all. Frank nodded, understanding all too well. He connected the drive to his computer and began reviewing the files. Impressed by the girl's organization, every medical report, scan, and assessment was meticulously labeled and dated. You've got your mother's attention to detail, he observed. And her stubbornness, Madison added. She won't admit it, but she's running out of options. The last specialist basically told her to accept reality and focus on my quality of life. Frank studied a series of MRI scans showing Madison's spinal injury. And what makes you think I can do better than world-class neurosurgeons? Madison fixed him with a penetrating gaze. Because you're not trying to follow established protocols. You're building something new. She gestured around the workshop. Mom told me about your history with NASA, how you kept pushing boundaries until they pushed back. Frank grunted non-committally and continued reviewing the files. The injury was severe but not complete. Some neural pathways remained intact, though not enough for functional movement. Standard prognosis was exactly what the specialists had told Eleanor: permanent paralysis from the mid-thoracic level down. Show me your current mobility, he said after several minutes of silence. Madison demonstrated the limited movement she retained. She could feel pressure and temperature in some areas below the injury site, and had partial motor function that allowed minimal hip flexion but no controlled leg movement. The physical therapists say I'm lucky, she noted with a hint of bitterness. Most T10 injuries don't retain even this much sensation. Frank observed her movements with a critical eye, noting the frustration that flashed across her face when her body refused to comply with her intentions. Have you tried any of the existing exoskeleton systems? Madison nodded. 3 different models. They're basically glorified leg braces with motors. I can walk in them, sort of, but it's not really me walking. It's the machine walking, and I'm just along for the ride. And you want more than that. I want to dance again, Mr. Calloway. The simple statement carried the weight of dreams deferred. Not just move from point A to point B, but actually dance. Frank considered her for a long moment. What you're asking for might not be possible, even with the most advanced neural interface. Your injury. Show me what you're working on, Madison interrupted. Mom said you have something revolutionary in development. I want to see it. Frank hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his work with anyone, let alone a teenager he'd just met. But there was something in Madison's direct gaze that compelled honesty. Wait here, he said finally, then disappeared into his secure lab. He returned moments later with what looked like an articulated framework of carbon fiber and titanium, small enough to fit in his hands. This is just a joint assembly prototype, he explained, setting it on the workbench. It's designed to interface directly with neural signals, amplifying even minimal impulses into functional movement. Madison leaned forward, examining the device with genuine interest. How is that different from the medical exoskeletons I've tried? Those systems detect surface electrical signals or use pre-programmed movement patterns, Frank explained, warming to his subject despite himself. This interfaces more deeply with the nervous system, using advanced algorithms to interpret even partial neural signals and translate them into precise mechanical responses. He activated the prototype, and the joint moved with fluid grace that mimicked natural human motion. The key is the response time. Commercial systems have a delay of 50 to 100 milliseconds between intention and action. This responds in under 10 milliseconds faster than your own muscles would. Madison watched, transfixed, as the joint moved through a series of increasingly complex motions. And you think this could help me walk? Walking? Maybe, Frank conceded. Dancing is another matter entirely. The complexity of balance, weight transfer, and artistic expression in ballet. He shook his head. That would require something far beyond this prototype. Madison's face fell slightly, but she quickly recovered. But you could develop it further, right? You built this by yourself, in a workshop. Frank didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he had been working toward exactly that goal, driven by Martha's memory and his own need to solve impossible problems. But there were complications. Madison couldn't understand: ethical issues, regulatory hurdles, and the ghosts of his NASA failures that still haunted him. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "The technology exists in theory, but developing it for someone with your specific injury would require resources I don't have, clearances I no longer possess, and medical expertise beyond my field." "But you're still trying," Madison pressed. "I can tell by the way you explained it. This matters to you." Frank sighed heavily and returned the prototype to its case. "Your mother shouldn't have gotten your hopes up. I'm just an old engineer tinkering in his workshop, not a miracle worker." Madison's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "That's exactly what all the doctors said. I thought you were different." "I'm being realistic." "No, you're being a coward," Madison retorted, her voice rising. "You're afraid to try because you might fail. Again." The words struck with precision, finding the exact center of Frank's deepest insecurities. His back pain flared as he straightened up, defensive anger rising to mask the hit. "You don't know anything about me or my failures, young lady. I know you couldn't save your friend at NASA," Madison shot back. "Mom told me, and I know you've been hiding in this workshop since your wife died, building things no one will ever use because you're too afraid to put them into the world." Frank's face went cold. "I think it's time for you to leave." Madison held his gaze defiantly, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a small bottle of pills. She set them on the workbench with deliberate care. "What's that?" Frank asked, though he recognized a prescription bottle when he saw one. "Sertraline for depression," Madison said flatly. "I've been taking them for 3 months. Mom doesn't know." She paused and letting that sink in. "The doctors keep talking about quality of life and adjusting to my new normal. But no one seems to understand that dance wasn't just something I did, it was who I am." Frank stared at the pill bottle, uncomfortable with the naked vulnerability in her admission. "I'm not just asking you to help me walk, Mr. Calloway," Madison continued, her voice softer now. "I'm asking you to help me live again." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Frank had spent 5 years avoiding emotional entanglements of any kind, focusing instead on the clean logic of mechanical problems. But sitting before him was a human problem wrapped in mechanical challenges, exactly the kind he had once specialized in solving. "I can't promise anything," he said finally, "and whatever I might develop would be experimental, untested, potentially dangerous." "More dangerous than giving up?" Madison asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Frank remembered another conversation, decades earlier, when James had convinced him to join the NASA mobility project, despite the risks. "Sometimes the greatest risk is refusing to take one," James had said. Frank rubbed his face wearily. "I'll need to run some tests, detailed neural response measurements, muscle activation patterns, residual mobility assessments, things your mother would need to approve." Madison's expression brightened immediately. "So you'll try?" "I'll evaluate what might be possible," Frank corrected. "No promises beyond that." The girl's smile transformed her face, revealing the vibrant person trapped inside the wheelchair. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." As Madison prepared to leave, Frank found himself wondering what exactly he was getting himself into. The rational part of his brain, the engineer trained to calculate risks and probabilities, was screaming that this was a recipe for disaster. But another part, long dormant, had awakened at the sight of Madison's smile. "One more thing," he said as she reached the door. "Show me your favorite dance. From before." Madison seemed surprised by the request, but pulled out her phone and scrolled through videos until she found what she was looking for. She handed it to Frank, who watched intently as a younger, uninjured Madison performed a solo from Giselle. "Martha danced," he said quietly, returning the phone. My wife. She was never professional, chose biomechanical research instead, but she understood the science behind the art. Said dancers know more about the true capabilities of the human body than most doctors. Madison absorbed this new information with interest. Will you tell me about her sometime? Frank nodded slowly. If we're going to work together, you should understand where this technology comes from. Martha's research laid the groundwork for much of what I'm developing now. As Madison wheeled down the ramp Frank had installed that morning, a detail she noted but didn't comment on, she turned back. My mom's going to call you tonight. She'll have a million questions and concerns. I'd expect nothing less. Just don't let her talk you out of it. Okay. There was vulnerability beneath the request. She means well, but she lives in a world of protocols and board approvals. This needs someone willing to color outside the lines. Frank watched her navigate carefully down his snow-dusted driveway, struck by the maturity behind her perception. I'll keep that in mind, he called after her. And Madison, bring your dance videos tomorrow. All of them. Her brilliant smile was answer enough. Eleanor's call came precisely at 8:00 p.m. as Frank was reviewing Madison's medical files for the third time, making notes on neural pathway preservation and potential interface points. She says you're going to help her, Eleanor began without preamble. Is that true? Frank cradled the phone against his shoulder, still marking calculations on a diagram of Madison's spinal injury. I said I'd evaluate what might be possible. That's not the same as promising a miracle. But you're considering it, Eleanor pressed, developing some kind of experimental system for her. I'm exploring the possibilities, Frank corrected. Your daughter makes a compelling case for herself. There was a pause on the line. She can be very persuasive when she wants something. Wonder where she gets that from, Frank remarked dryly. The ghost of a laugh came through the phone. Fair point. Eleanor's tone grew serious again. Frank, I need to understand what you're proposing. As a mother and as a doctor? Frank set down his pen and gave her his full attention. What I'm proposing is to adapt neural interface technology I've been developing to create a mobility system specifically calibrated to Madison's particular injury and capabilities. Not an exoskeleton that moves for her, but an enhancement system that amplifies her intentions and existing neural signals. That sounds ambitious. It is, and completely experimental. Frank acknowledged. There would be no guarantees, significant risks, and a long development process requiring Madison's full participation and commitment. And you believe this could restore her ability to walk to dance? Frank hesitated. Walking, with training and time, yes, dancing as she did before. That's a much higher bar, but the technology could potentially allow for movement far more natural and responsive than anything currently available. There was a long silence, and Frank could almost see Eleanor weighing options and outcomes as she had always done, methodical, thorough, calculating probabilities. I'd need oversight, she said finally. Medical supervision, regular assessments, established safety protocols. Reasonable, Frank conceded. As long as that oversight doesn't become obstruction, and FDA exemptions for experimental device testing. Eleanor continued. I have contacts who could help with that. You've given this some thought, Frank observed. Since the moment I learned what you've been working on, Eleanor admitted. I may be desperate to help Madison, but I'm still a doctor. I won't cut corners on her safety. I wouldn't expect you to. Another pause. Longer this time. Why are you doing this? Frank, after all these years, all that happened between us, you owe me nothing. Frank gazed at Martha's photograph on his workbench. Maybe I'm tired of building things that never leave my workshop. Or maybe I see something in Madison that reminds me of what's at stake when we give up on challenging problems. She said you showed her a prototype, that it moved like nothing she'd seen before. It's promising technology, Frank allowed, but adapting it for spinal cord injury applications is uncharted territory. Since when has that ever stopped you? There was a smile in Eleanor's voice, a flash of the woman he'd known decades ago. Frank found himself smiling in return, though she couldn't see it. Fair point. They discussed logistics for several more minutes when Madison would come to the workshop, what initial tests would be needed, how Eleanor could be involved without hovering. It felt strangely familiar, this back and forth of ideas and practical considerations. In another lifetime, it had been their natural rhythm. One last thing, Eleanor said as the call was ending. Madison doesn't know this, but I've exhausted my resources pursuing treatments. The experimental procedures, the specialists, they've depleted her college fund and more. Whatever you develop, I may not be able to adequately compensate you. Frank's response was immediate and firm. I'm not doing this for money, Ellie. The old nickname slipped out unbidden, hanging awkwardly in the silence that followed. Thank you, Frank, she said finally, her voice softer than before. I'll bring Madison tomorrow after school. After the call ended, Frank returned to the secure lab and pulled up the neural interface schematics he'd been refining for months. The system was designed for subtle enhancement of normal motor function, making industrial workers stronger, steadier, less prone to injury. Adapting it for someone with Madison's level of impairment would require a fundamental redesign. In for a penny, he muttered, beginning to sketch modifications on his tablet. He worked through the night, losing himself in the problem-solving process that had always been his refuge. By dawn, he had the beginnings of a new approach, one that might just give Madison what she needed. He was making coffee when the perimeter alarm sounded. The security monitor showed a black government-issue SUV approaching his gate, followed by two more identical vehicles. Frank's blood ran cold. He knew that formation. Those vehicles. He switched to a different camera angle and zoomed in on the lead car's passenger, Dr. Victor Hayes, former NASA Director of Special Projects, now CEO of Meditech Industries, sat in the passenger seat, his hawk-like profile unmistakable even after all these years. Damn it, Frank muttered, quickly initiating the secure lab's emergency protocol. The specialized components and prototypes slid into hidden compartments as reinforced panels covered the workbenches. The vehicle stopped at his gate, and Frank activated the external speaker. Private property, state your business. Victor's familiar voice came through the intercom, unchanged by the decades since they'd last spoken. Hello, Frank. Long time no see. We need to talk about Eleanor Reed and her daughter, and about what you're planning to do with my technology. Frank's jaw tightened. Your technology? That's a matter for debate. A debate best had face-to-face. Don't you think? Victor replied smoothly. For old time's sake. Frank hesitated, then pressed the gate release. Whatever storm was coming, better to face it head-on. Victor Hayes had aged well, his once dark hair now distinguished silver, his tall frame still fit and imposing as he emerged from the SUV. The men accompanying him were clearly security earpieces, alert eyes scanning the surroundings, hands ready near concealed weapons. Still living like a hermit, I see, Victor observed as he approached the workshop door. Though I hear you took a swim yesterday. Local hero makes good. Auri, what do you want? Victor, Frank asked bluntly, blocking the doorway. Just a friendly conversation between old colleagues. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. May I come in? It's rather cold out here. Frank reluctantly stepped aside, allowing Victor entry but blocking the security detail with a firm shake of his head. He comes in alone, or not at all. Victor nodded to his men, who retreated to a watchful distance. Inside the workshop, he surveyed the space with calculated interest. Impressive setup for a private operation, he noted. Though I imagine the really interesting work happens behind that secure door. Frank remained standing, arms crossed. Get to the point. Victor! The older man sighed theatrically. Always so direct. Very well. Our monitoring systems flag some interesting component purchases, recently specialized neural interface materials, miniaturized servo controllers. carbon nanotube sensor arrays. The kind of shopping list that suggests someone is building technology very similar to the Artemis project. Technology that was never patented or classified as proprietary, Frank pointed out. After the accident, the whole project was disavowed. Officially, yes, Victor agreed. Unofficially, Meditech acquired all research assets when NASA privatized certain special projects divisions in the early 2000s. Frank's expression darkened. Assets, is that what you call James's life's work? The technology he died developing. James Woodward was a brilliant scientist who understood the risks, Victor said coolly. As did you. The difference is, you walked away. I continued the work. You continued weapons development, Frank corrected. The mobility enhancement was always meant for civilian applications, space exploration, industrial safety, medical rehabilitation. You turned it into a military asset. Victor waved a dismissive hand. Applications evolve based on market demand. And speaking of medical rehabilitation, he fixed Frank with a penetrating stare. Eleanor Reed's daughter, a tragic case. Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. How do you know about Madison? Please, Frank, I'm on the board of St. Mercy Hospital. Eleanor's appointment required my approval. Victor smiled thinly. And I make it my business to know when former NASA engineers start developing experimental neural technology for spinal injury patients. You've been monitoring me, keeping tabs on potential intellectual property concerns, Victor corrected. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit, cease and desist. Frank laughed without humor. You can't be serious. Deadly serious, Victor replied, his smile vanishing. Meditech has invested billions in neural interface technology. Our medical division is 6 months away from FDA approval on a revolutionary mobility system for spinal cord injuries. Let me guess, priced out of reach for anyone without platinum health insurance. Victor's expression hardened. The market determines value. Frank always has. But that's beside the point. The point is, you're working with proprietary technology, potentially endangering a vulnerable patient, and definitely threatening our market position. I'm trying to help a girl walk again, Frank growled. Something your precious market position hasn't managed to do. Nobility doesn't protect you from litigation, Victor countered, or from criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. Frank stepped closer, his voice dropping dangerously. Are you threatening me, Victor? Warning you, the older man corrected. As a former colleague and out of respect for what you contributed to the original research. They stared at each other, the weight of decades of divergent paths hanging between them. I'll send you information about our patient assistance program, Victor said finally, moving toward the door. The Reed girl might qualify for our clinical trials, though the waiting list is substantial. How generous, Frank replied coldly. At the door, Victor paused. One more thing. Frank, Eleanor Reed doesn't know about your role in the Artemis project failure. Does she about your decision to override safety protocols that day? The old guilt surged through Frank like a physical pain. Get out! I thought not, Victor nodded to himself. Consider carefully what you're risking for yourself and for that girl. Some costs are too high, even for a shot at redemption. Frank watched the SUVs depart, his mind racing. Victor's visit was no coincidence, the timing too perfect with Eleanor's reappearance in his life. Something else was happening here, something beyond corporate territorialism. He needed answers, and he needed them before Madison's appointment that afternoon. Frank grabbed his keys in his heaviest winter coat. Time to visit an old friend who still had access to information no search engine could provide. The Veterans Affairs Hospital in Oakland was a maze of identical corridors and bureaucratic checkpoints, but Frank navigated it with the confidence of frequent visits. He found Carlos Diaz in the familiar spot, the solarium on the East Wing's 3rd floor, where the morning light was best for reading. At 72, Carlos retained the bearing of the naval intelligence officer he'd once been, though his powerful frame was now confined to a specialized wheelchair. Multiple sclerosis had gradually claimed his mobility over the past decade, but his mind remained sharp as ever. Twice in 1 week, Carlos noted without looking up from his book. To what do I owe the honor? Frank settled into the chair opposite his old friend. Need information that doesn't officially exist. Carlos marked his place and closed the book. Those are always the interesting conversations. What kind of ghost are you chasing? Victor Hayes, Meditech Industries. Neural interface technology for spinal cord injuries. Carlos's eyebrows rose. Ambitious ghosts today. He glanced around to ensure their privacy, then leaned forward. Meditech has a classified defense contract for neural enhancement systems. Very hush-hush, but word gets around when you spend enough time in VA hospitals. What kind of enhancements? The kind that turn disabled veterans into walking recruitment advertisements, Carlos replied with a touch of bitterness. Experimental exoskeletons with direct neural interfaces, supposedly revolutionary. Frank absorbed this, connecting dots. How experimental? Carlos's expression darkened. There have been incidents, nothing officially reported, but nurses talk. Veterans who volunteered for the program and came back worse than before. Central nervous system damage, seizures. One case of catastrophic interface rejection that left a former marathon runner completely paralyzed. Jesus, Frank muttered. They're rushing the technology. Racing a competitor, from what I hear, Carlos added. Some Chinese firm has a similar system in development. It's become a private sector arms race with disabled bodies as the testing ground. Frank ran a hand through his silver hair, troubled. And the FDA is allowing this limited approval for controlled clinical trials, Carlos confirmed, which really means testing on veterans and low-income patients willing to sign extensive waivers. The pieces were falling into place. Victor's warning wasn't just about intellectual property, it was about eliminating competition before Meditech's flawed system reached market. One more thing, Frank said. Eleanor Reed, executive director at St. Mercy. What's her connection to Hayes? Carlos thought for a moment. Reed. Yes, she was appointed about 18 months ago. Controversial choice, she'd only been there a few years, but leapfrogged several more senior candidates. Hospital board was divided until Hayes threw his support behind her. Frank felt the floor shift beneath him. Hayes personally backed her appointment. So the gossip goes, Carlos confirmed. Why the interest in Dr. Reed? Frank stood abruptly. Her daughter was injured in a bus accident, spinal cord damage. Understanding dawned in Carlos's eyes. And you're developing something to help her. Trying to, Frank acknowledged, but now I'm wondering if there's more to the story than a random accident. Carlos's expression grew grave. Be careful. Frank, Meditech doesn't like competition, especially from someone who knows where the bodies are buried. On the drive back to his workshop, Frank's mind raced through implications and possibilities. The timing of Madison's accident, Eleanor's appointment, Victor's sudden appearance coincidences were stacking up too neatly. He needed to warn Eleanor, but first, he needed evidence. The workshop was quiet when he returned, the morning's confrontation leaving no visible trace. Frank went directly to his secure lab and accessed the specialized search algorithms he'd developed for research purposes, tools that could find connections and patterns across protected databases without leaving traceable footprints. He input the parameters Madison Reed, bus accident, Meditech, clinical trials, neural interface technology. Then he added James Woodward's name, a hunch based on Victor's unusual mention of his old friend. While the search ran, Frank reviewed Madison's medical files again, this time looking not just at the injury itself, but at the entire treatment timeline. Something nagged at him, a pattern in the specialists Eleanor had consulted, the facilities that had provided treatment. He cross-referenced them against Meditech's known subsidiaries and research partners. 7 of the 17 specialists had direct ties to Meditech. 3 more had received significant research grants from the company. Damn it, Ellie, he muttered. They've been tracking Madison's case from the beginning. The search algorithm pinged with results, and what Frank saw made his blood run cold. Madison's school bus driver had received a significant bank deposit 2 days before the accident from a shell company linked to Meditech subsidiaries. The driver had disappeared after being released on bail. His case mysteriously stalled in the legal system. More damning still, Madison's name appeared on an internal Meditech document dated 3 weeks before her accident, a list of potential candidates for longitudinal neural response study, with specific attention to subjects with dance or athletic backgrounds. The implication was horrifying. Madison's accident wasn't random. It was engineered a controlled injury to create a perfect test subject for Meditech's neural interface technology. Frank's hands shook as he compiled the evidence onto an encrypted drive. Eleanor needed to see this immediately. Before Madison arrived for her appointment, he reached for his phone, then froze at the sound of tires on gravel. The security monitor showed Eleanor's Mercedes approaching far earlier than expected. Something was wrong. Her posture behind the wheel was rigid, her movements jerky with tension as she parked and emerged alone from the vehicle. Frank secured the lab and went to meet her, evidence drive in hand. One look at Eleanor's face confirmed his worst fears she already knew. "You knew about Meditech," she accused without preamble, her voice shaking with fury. "You knew about the Artemis project and Hayes and everything else, and you didn't tell me." Frank held up the drive. "I just confirmed it myself. Meditech targeted my daughter," Eleanor finished, tears of rage in her eyes. "Created a controlled accident to produce a specific spinal injury compatible with their neural interface testing protocol. Used me to monitor her treatment and response. All orchestrated by Victor Hayes, the man who sponsored my appointment as executive director." Frank nodded grimly. "How did you find out Hayes came to see me this morning?" Eleanor said, pacing the workshop floor. "Offered Madison immediate placement in their revolutionary clinical trial. Said a mutual friend had informed him of our situation." Her eyes blazed as she turned to Frank. "He meant you." "I never watched." "Then he showed me the Artemis project files," she continued, cutting him off. "Your role in it. The safety protocols you overrode. The decisions that led to the explosion that killed James Woodward." The accusation hit Frank like a physical blow. "That's not what happened." "Isn't it?" Eleanor demanded. "Hayes had documentation. Frank, internal NASA reviews, sworn testimony, your own resignation letter accepting responsibility." "Doctored," Frank insisted. Victor was always skilled at rewriting history. Eleanor studied his face, seeking truth. Then what really happened? Frank had never fully told the story, not even to Martha. The classified nature of the project had provided a convenient shield against having to relive his greatest failure. But now, with Madison's future hanging in the balance, the time for secrets was past. "James and I discovered a flaw in the neural interface design," he began, his voice rough with memory. "A feedback loop that could cause catastrophic system overload under certain conditions. We were scheduled to present our findings to the project directors the next day, findings that would have set the project back by years and cost millions in redesign." Eleanor listened intently as Frank continued. "That night, someone accessed the test chamber and modified the oxygen delivery system. When we initiated the standard morning systems check, the altered mixture created a spark that ignited the oxygen-enriched environment." Frank's hands clenched at the memory. "The initial explosion was containable. I got most of the team out, but James went back for the prototype and our research data." "And you followed him," Eleanor said softly, the anger in her eyes giving way to understanding. Frank nodded. "The secondary explosion brought down part of the ceiling. James was trapped. I tried to move the beam, but..." He trailed off, the familiar guilt washing over him. "The official investigation concluded that I had overridden safety protocols by continuing the systems check, despite unusual readings. But those readings were normal based on the altered calibration settings someone had programmed overnight. Hayes," Eleanor concluded. "I could never prove it," Frank acknowledged. "But James and I were the only ones advocating for a complete redesign. Everyone else, including Victor, wanted to proceed with human trials despite the risks. Eleanor sank into a chair, the implications overwhelming her. And now he's doing exactly that with my daughter as a test subject. The accident was deliberate. Ellie, Frank said gently. Madison was selected because of her background in dance. The neural pathways of a trained dancer are ideal for testing precision movement interfaces. Eleanor covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I brought her to every appointment. I trusted the specialists Hayes recommended. I let them map her neural responses, test experimental stimulation protocols. She looked up, horror dawning. Oh God, the bus driver. I testified at his bail hearing that it was just a tragic accident, that he'd had a seizure. He's disappeared, Frank confirmed. Probably paid well for his role. Eleanor stood abruptly, fury replacing shock. I'll destroy Hayes. I'll take this to the media. The FBI, and accomplish what? Frank interrupted. Meditech has the best lawyers in the country, and Hayes clearly has contingency plans. Why else reveal everything to you now? Eleanor paused, her analytical mind reasserting itself. Because of you, she realized. He's afraid of what you're developing for Madison, something that might outperform their system. Frank nodded. He came here this morning to warn me off. When that didn't work, he approached you directly, using my past to drive a wedge between us. But why reveal Meditech's involvement in Madison's accident that just gives me ammunition against them? Because he's already prepared his defense, Frank explained grimly. The story will be that Madison was selected for an advanced experimental treatment program, completely legitimate, with all proper approvals in place. The bus driver had a genuine medical emergency. Any evidence suggesting otherwise will be dismissed as conspiracy theories from a grieving mother. Eleanor's shoulders slumped as she recognized the truth in his assessment. So what do we do? I can't let them get away with this. They crippled my daughter to turn her into a test subject. We give Madison what Hayes fears most, Frank said, determination hardening his voice. A better solution, one that actually works and puts her back in control of her own body. Eleanor studied him, hope warring with caution. Can you really do that? Not alone, Frank admitted. I'll need your medical expertise, access to facilities and equipment I don't have, and Madison's absolute commitment to the process. You'll have it, Eleanor promised. All of it. The security monitor chimed, showing Madison's specialized transport van approaching the gate. Frank opened it remotely, then turned back to Eleanor. She can't know about this yet, he warned. Not until we have a functioning prototype to offer as an alternative to Meditech's system. The psychological impact of learning she was deliberately injured. Eleanor nodded reluctantly. Agreed. For now, we focus on the solution, not the crime. As Madison's van came into view, Frank made a silent promise to the memory of James Woodward. This time, he wouldn't fail. This time, the technology they had dreamed of would fulfill its original purpose, not as a weapon or a profit center, but as a bridge between human intention and physical possibility. For Madison, for James, for all the dreams deferred by those who valued profit over people. Ready? He asked Eleanor, seeing the same determination reflected in her eyes. Ready, she confirmed, straightening her shoulders and composing her features into a welcoming smile as Madison's wheelchair lift deployed. The battle lines were drawn. Meditech might have billions in resources and political connections, but Frank had something more valuable: the truth about the technology's origins and the motivation of personal redemption. Plus, he now had Eleanor Reed on his side, a formidable ally he hadn't expected to find again after all these years. Madison waved as she spotted them, her face lighting up with excitement about the day's tests. Watching her, Frank felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. Whatever it took, whatever the personal cost, he would give this girl back her ability to dance. Everything else, Hayes, Meditech, his own past failures, would have to wait. Again, Frank instructed, watching Madison's face contort with concentration as she focused on the neural interface sensors attached to her lower body. Imagine the movement as clearly as possible, Don't try to force it, just visualize. It was their fourth week of intensive testing, and progress had been painstakingly slow. The workshop had been transformed into a makeshift rehabilitation lab, with medical equipment on loan from Eleanor's hospital and custom diagnostic systems Frank had developed. Madison exhaled slowly, sweat beading on her forehead despite the workshop's cool temperature. The holographic display above the workbench showed faint neural impulses traveling down pathways that her injury had compromised but not completely severed. "I can feel something," she reported, frustration evident in her voice. "Like pins and needles, but deeper, but I still can't make it move the way I want." Frank adjusted the sensitivity of the sensors, noting the readings. "That's normal. We're remapping neural pathways, teaching your brain to communicate with your body through new channels. It takes time." "We don't have time," Madison muttered, glancing at the calendar prominently displayed on the workshop wall. The spring dance showcase at her former ballet school was circled in red, just 10 weeks away. She had made Frank promise to have a working prototype ready by then. Despite his warnings about unrealistic expectations, Eleanor entered from the small office space Frank had cleared for her, reviewing data on her tablet. She had taken a leave of absence from the hospital, citing personal reasons, though the board's reaction had been notably cool. Hayes's influence, no doubt. "The latest MRI shows increased activity in the neural bypass regions," she reported, displaying the scans on the main screen. "The targeted stimulation protocol is creating new connections, just as we hoped." Frank studied the images with cautious optimism. The combination of his neural interface technology and Eleanor's medical expertise had yielded promising results. Madison was showing more neural activity below her injury site than any of her previous doctors had thought possible. "Let's try something different," he suggested, wheeling over a cart containing his newest prototype. "This is the first fully integrated segment hip to knee, with the enhanced sensor array we discussed." The device looked nothing like conventional medical exoskeletons, where those were bulky and industrial. Frank's creation was sleek in minimal carbon fiber and titanium components no thicker than a pencil, with hair-thin sensory filaments designed to amplify the faintest neural signals. Madison's eyes widened. "Is that ready for testing?" "Just the right leg portion," Frank cautioned, "and only for brief diagnostic sessions. The neural response algorithms need calibration specific to your movement patterns." Eleanor examined the device with professional interest. "The sensor density is remarkable. How did you achieve this level of miniaturization?" "Borrowed some techniques from Martha's research," Frank explained, beginning the careful process of fitting the device to Madison's right leg. She was studying how dancers maintain proprioceptive awareness during complex movements, the internal sensing system that tells you where your body is in space without looking. These sensors mimic those neural pathways. As he worked, Frank was acutely aware of Eleanor watching him. Their relationship had evolved over the past month into an uneasy alliance, professional respect mixed with lingering personal tension and the shared secret of Meditech's involvement in Madison's injury. "This connects directly to the neural interface," Eleanor asked, indicating the filament array. Frank nodded. "The sensors detect even minimal nerve impulses and amplify them, while the mechanical components provide the support and power to translate those impulses into physical movement." Madison remained unusually quiet during the fitting process, her expression thoughtful. "Will I feel it?" she asked finally. "When it moves, will it feel like me moving, or like a machine moving me?" The question cut to the heart of what made Frank's approach different from conventional systems. "If it works correctly, it should feel like you," he said. "That's the whole point. It's not replacing your control, just enhancing what's already there." When the device was properly positioned, Frank connected it to the diagnostic system and began the calibration sequence. "Start with intention only," he instructed Madison. "Visualize moving your leg, but don't try to force anything physically." Madison closed her eyes, her face a study in concentration. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the sensors began to register activity, faint neural signals that the interface amplified and translated into commands. The exoskeleton segment responded with a subtle movement, a slight bend at the knee, smooth and controlled. Madison's eyes flew open. I felt that it was. It was like the movement came from inside, not outside. Frank and Eleanor exchanged a glance of cautious triumph. This was exactly what they had been working toward, a system that felt like a natural extension of the user's own body, not an external force controlling it. Try again, Frank encouraged. This time, focus on straightening your knee. Madison concentrated, and the movement came more quickly this time, the leg extending in a fluid motion that mimicked natural movement far more closely than any medical exoskeleton could achieve. It's responding to my thoughts, Madison marveled, tears forming in her eyes. Not just copying program motions. It's actually listening to me. The remainder of the session showed promising results. The neural interface was functioning as designed, detecting and amplifying Madison's intentions with increasing accuracy as the algorithm learned her specific neural patterns. When they finally removed the prototype, Madison was exhausted but elated. How soon until you can build the complete system? She asked, the familiar determination back in her voice. Frank hesitated, not wanting to inflate her expectations. The results are promising, but we're still in early testing. A full lower body system would be exponentially more complex, requiring coordinated movement across multiple joint assemblies. But it's possible, Madison pressed. Theoretically, yes, Frank conceded. But the timeline you're hoping for is necessary, Madison interrupted firmly. The showcase isn't just some random deadline. Mr. Calloway, it's my statement to everyone who wrote me off. To myself. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Madison, Frank is right to be cautious. The neural integration process takes time, and rushing it could be dangerous. Madison shrugged off her mother's hand. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for the chance to try. She fixed Frank with an intense gaze. You said this technology amplifies what's already there. Well, my determination is definitely there. All I need is for the tech to catch up. Frank recognized the fire in her eyes, the same stubborn resolve he'd seen in Eleanor decades ago, and in himself throughout his career. It was the quality that separated those who accepted limitations from those who defied them. I'll accelerate development of the full lower body system, he decided, ignoring Eleanor's concerned look. But we proceed carefully, with regular medical monitoring and absolute honesty about any discomfort or unusual sensations. Deal. Madison nodded solemnly. Deal. As Eleanor helped Madison back into her wheelchair for the journey home, Frank returned to his secure lab to review the day's data. The results were even more promising than he had let on. The neural response patterns showed adaptation and learning that exceeded his projections. He was making notes when Eleanor returned, her expression troubled. You shouldn't encourage unrealistic expectations, she said without preamble. The showcase is too soon. Frank continued working, not looking up. Said the woman who brought her daughter to a reclusive engineer when 17 specialists told her nothing could be done. Eleanor sighed, acknowledging the hit. That's different. I was looking for hope, not a specific timeline. Madison needs more than hope, Frank replied, finally meeting her gaze. She needs a goal, a finish line to focus on. Without that, all of this is just another medical procedure being done to her, not something she's actively participating in. And if we fail to meet that goal, if the system isn't ready, Frank's expression hardened, then we work harder, sleep less, solve problems faster. He gestured to the data displays. The neural response patterns are stronger than we anticipated. She's fighting to regain control. Ellie, we need to match her determination with our own. Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. This isn't just about Madison anymore, is it? This is about Hayes and James and all the unfinished business from your NASA days. Does it matter? Frank challenged. As long as the end result helps your daughter, it matters if you're pushing too hard because of personal vendettas. Eleanor countered. This isn't just an engineering problem. Frank, it's my daughter's life, her future. Frank's shoulders slumped slightly, the defensive edge leaving his posture. I know that, but it's also about what's right. Hayes and Meditech deliberately caused Madison's injury to create a test subject. They've done the same to others. Someone has to stop them, and right now, the best way to do that is to create a better alternative to their technology. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. And the showcase is the perfect venue to demonstrate what we've developed, Frank explained. Public, well-documented, with medical professionals in attendance. Hayes won't be able to suppress or discredit what everyone can see with their own eyes. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's expression. You're planning to use Madison's performance to expose Meditech. Only if you agree, Frank assured her. And only after we're certain the technology is safe and effective. Eleanor moved to the workbench, examining the prototype components with new perspective. I want Hayes to pay for what he's done, she admitted, but not at Madison's expense. Her recovery comes first, the justice can wait. Frank nodded, respecting her priorities. Agreed, but I believe we can accomplish both, if we work together. The tension between them eased, replaced by the focused collaboration that had characterized their relationship in its earliest days. They worked late into the night, refining designs and protocols, finding a shared rhythm that bridged the decades of separation. When Eleanor finally left for home, Frank remained in the lab, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Martha's death. This project wasn't just about helping one girl dance again. It was about reclaiming the vision he and James had shared, about technology that enhanced human capability rather than exploiting it. The calendar on the wall marked the days remaining until the showcase. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when Frank was working alone in the lab. The first warning was the perimeter alarm, followed by the security system's notification of multiple breaches at different points around the property. Frank switched to the external cameras, counting 4 masked figures approaching the workshop from different directions. Not random thieves, this was a coordinated operation by professionals who knew exactly what they were after. He initiated the lab's emergency lockdown protocol, securing the most sensitive prototypes and data, then reached for the shotgun he kept mounted beneath the main workbench. In his younger days, Frank might have attempted to confront the intruders directly, but at 65, with a bad back and no illusions about his combat effectiveness, he opted for a more strategic approach. The workshop's lighting system responded to his voice command, plunging the entire space into darkness except for strobing emergency lights that created disorienting patterns. Frank moved quickly to a concealed panel near the rear exit, activating the workshop's security countermeasures, a system he'd designed after previous attempts to steal his work. The first intruder breached the main door using a portable ram, only to be met with a deafening alarm and a fine mist of non-lethal but highly disorienting CS gas. Frank watched on the infrared monitor as the figure staggered backward, colliding with a second attacker entering behind him. The third and fourth intruders attempted entry through the skylights, rappelling down into what they thought was the main workspace. Instead, they descended into a secondary area Frank had specifically designed as a decoy, filled with outdated equipment and irrelevant prototypes. Frank used the confusion to make his way toward the emergency exit, intending to circle around to his truck and call for help. His back screamed in protest as he ducked beneath workbenches and navigated the familiar space by memory and touch. He was halfway to the exit when a searing pain exploded in his lower back, an old injury pushed beyond its limits by the awkward movement. Frank stumbled, knocking over a cart of tools that crashed to the floor with a betraying clatter. Instantly, one of the intruders turned toward the sound, weapon raised. Frank could see the infrared signature moving in his direction, methodical and professional, not local thieves. Then, these were trained operatives, Likely Meditech security contractors. Frank pressed himself against a workbench, pain radiating up his spine as he tried to control his breathing. The approaching figure was less than 20 feet away now, using proper tactical movement techniques to minimize exposure. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy in Frank's hands as he raised it, preparing for a confrontation he was unlikely to win. But before he could take aim, the workshop's rear door burst open, flooding the space with light from outside. A wheelchair crashed through the opening at high speed, with Madison at the controls. But this was no ordinary wheelchair. Attached to it was the partial exoskeleton prototype Frank had been developing, now modified into what appeared to be an improvised battering ram. "Mr. Calloway!" Madison shouted, the distraction giving Frank the moment he needed to roll behind heavier cover. The intruders, startled by the unexpected arrival, hesitated momentarily. It was all the advantage Madison needed. With remarkable skill, she maneuvered the motorized wheelchair in a tight circle, the extended exoskeleton components sweeping across the space and knocking one intruder off his feet. Frank used the distraction to activate the workshop's secondary defense system, electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronic equipment within the building's perimeter. The intruders' communication devices and night vision equipment went dead simultaneously. "This way," Madison called, guiding her wheelchair toward Frank's position. "Mom's outside with the car. We need to move." Frank didn't question how they knew he was in danger. With Madison's help, he made it to the rear exit, each step sending waves of agony through his damaged back. Outside, Eleanor waited in her Mercedes, engine running and driver's door open. "Get in, both of you," she shouted, helping Frank into the passenger seat while Madison transferred herself from the wheelchair with practiced efficiency, leaving the modified device behind. They sped down the gravel driveway just as the intruders regrouped at the workshop entrance. In the rearview mirror, Frank caught a glimpse of one man speaking into a satellite phone, the kind not affected by localized EMP, while others loaded equipment into a waiting vehicle. "How did you know?" Frank gasped, the pain making it difficult to speak. "Anonymous tip," Eleanor replied grimly, her eyes fixed on the road as she drove well above the speed limit. "Someone called my private hospital line and said you were in danger? That Meditech had sent a retrieval team to secure intellectual property." "Hayes," Frank concluded, "sending a warning shot, letting us know he can reach us anytime." Madison leaned forward from the back seat. "They were after the exoskeleton design. Weren't they your neural interface technology?" Frank nodded, grimacing as they hit a pothole. "Most likely, or trying to slow our progress by destroying the prototypes." "Did they get anything important?" Eleanor asked, finally slowing as they reached the main highway. "No," Frank assured them. "The critical components and data are in secured storage that would take hours to breach. They were looking for a quick grab-and-go operation." Eleanor guided the car toward the hospital, her decision made without discussion. "You need medical attention for your back, and we need a secure place to regroup." Frank didn't argue. The pain was intense enough that even his stubborn independence took a back seat to pragmatism. Besides, the hospital would have security cameras and witnesses protection against another immediate attempt. "What about the workshop?" Madison asked. "All your equipment, the prototypes, insured," Frank replied tersely. "And the most important elements are backed up off-site." He turned to Eleanor, a new urgency in his voice despite the pain. "Hayes is escalating because we're making progress. He's afraid of what we're developing." Eleanor nodded grimly. "Which means we need to accelerate our timeline." "How?" Madison asked. "If they've compromised the workshop, we move operations," Eleanor decided. "My hospital has research facilities, secure laboratories. As executive director, I can authorize an experimental medical technology initiative." Frank shook his head. "Hayes is on your hospital board. He'll block it or use it to monitor our progress." "Not if we don't call it what it is," Eleanor countered, a strategy forming as she drove. "We'll designate it as a continuation of existing approved research. Hide it within other projects. I still have allies at the hospital who don't answer to Hayes." Frank studied her profile, impressed by her calculating approach. The idealistic young doctor he'd known had evolved into a formidable strategist, someone who understood how to work within systems while subverting them when necessary. That might work, he conceded, but we'll need to move quickly. Tonight's attack was just the beginning. Eleanor's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Let them come. I'm done being manipulated by Victor Hayes and his corporate thugs. This is my daughter we're talking about, and all the other patients they've exploited. Her fierce determination reminded Frank why he had fallen for her all those years ago. Beneath the professional exterior, Eleanor had always possessed a core of steel that emerged when confronted with injustice. Madison watched this exchange with keen interest. So we're really doing this. Taking on Meditech. We're helping you walk again, Frank corrected, meeting her gaze in the rearview mirror. Everything else is secondary, but the determined set of Madison's jaw suggested she understood the larger stakes just as clearly as they did. This wasn't just about her recovery anymore. It was about exposing a corporate conspiracy that had harmed countless patients in pursuit of profit. As they pulled into the hospital's emergency entrance, Frank made a mental list of what they would need to salvage from the workshop and what could be rebuilt at the new location. The attack had cost them time and resources, but it had also confirmed they were on the right track. Hayes wouldn't have reacted so aggressively if the neural interface technology wasn't a genuine threat to Meditech's plans. I'll need to make some call, Frank said as hospital staff approached with a wheelchair. There are people who can help us, people Hayes doesn't know about. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Do what you need to do. Madison and I will secure the research space and begin transferring equipment. As they wheeled Frank into the emergency department, his back screaming with each movement, he found himself thinking not about the pain or the setback, but about Martha. She would have appreciated the symmetry of using Eleanor's hospital to complete work that had begun in his isolated workshop, bringing his solitary quest back into the world of collaboration and shared purpose that Martha had always encouraged. Don't worry about me, Frank told Eleanor as nurses began their assessment. Focus on protecting the prototype components. That's what Hayes is really after. Eleanor squeezed his hand briefly, the first such contact between them in decades. We'll handle it. You just get that back fixed. We need you at full capacity. The determined look they exchanged contained volumes of unspoken understanding. Whatever had happened in their past, whatever complications lay between them, they were unified now in a common purpose that transcended personal history. As Eleanor departed with Madison to begin implementing their contingency plan, Frank allowed himself to be examined by the emergency physician. The attack had been a setback, yes, but perhaps also an opportunity, forcing them out of isolation and into a setting where their work could have greater impact. Hayes had intended to intimidate them into abandoning the project. Instead, he had only hardened their resolve. Neural response time improved by 17%, Dr. Lydia Chen reported, studying the diagnostic display in the converted laboratory space deep within St. Mercy Hospital's research wing. The algorithm is adapting to Madison's specific patterns much faster than anticipated. Frank nodded, making notes on his tablet as he observed Madison's training session. The full lower body exoskeleton prototype was now operational, though still requiring frequent adjustments and calibration. Madison stood between parallel bars, the sleek device attached to her legs and lower torso, practicing basic weight shifts and controlled movements. Eleanor had kept her word, creating a secure research space under the official designation of Advanced Mobility Rehabilitation Research, innocuous enough to avoid immediate scrutiny from the hospital board, yet broad enough to encompass their actual work. Dr. Chen, a brilliant neurologist with no ties to Meditech, had been recruited to provide the specialized medical expertise their project required. Her skepticism had quickly given way to excitement as she witnessed the system's capabilities. The proprioceptive feedback loop is particularly impressive, she continued, adjusting a setting on the neural interface. The system isn't just reading neural signals, it's providing sensory information back to the brain. Madison isn't just controlling the exoskeleton, she's feeling through it. Frank watched as Madison took a deliberate step forward, then another. Her movements were careful and measured, but unmistakably intentional, not the robotic gait of conventional medical exoskeletons, but the focused motion of a dancer relearning her body's capabilities. "How does it feel?" he asked her. Madison concentrated on her balance before answering. "Strange, but right, like my legs are there again, just with some extra structure around them." She smiled suddenly. "The floor feels cold on my right foot. I can actually feel temperature differences." This was a breakthrough they hadn't expected so soon. The sensory feedback system was transmitting environmental data to Madison's brain, creating a more complete integration between user and technology. "Try a weight transfer to your left side," Dr. Chen suggested. "Focus on the hip joint articulation." Madison complied, her face showing intense concentration as she shifted her weight. The movement was smoother than previous attempts, the exoskeleton responding to her neural commands with increasing precision. "Excellent," Dr. Chen approved. "The adaptive algorithms are learning your intention patterns. Each successful movement reinforces the neural pathways." Frank made additional notes, already envisioning refinements to the system. The attack on his workshop 3 weeks earlier had forced them to accelerate development, working around the clock to rebuild essential components. Surprisingly, the pressure had led to creative solutions they might not have discovered otherwise. Eleanor entered the lab. Her hospital administrator's badge prominently displayed a necessary precaution as they moved through the building. "How's it going?" "Better than expected," Frank replied, showing her the neural response data. "The sensory feedback system is fully operational. Madison can feel temperature and pressure through the interface." Eleanor's professional demeanor softened as she watched her daughter take another step, more confident than the last. "She's actually walking." "Not walking," Madison corrected, concentrating on her movements. "Dancing. Watch." With deliberate focus, Madison executed a simple ballet position, first position, with heels together and toes pointed outward. The movement was rudimentary compared to her pre-injury capabilities, but unmistakably ballet. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Yes, dancing," she agreed softly. Dr. Chen continued monitoring the neural interface readings. "The response patterns are remarkably clean. Madison's brain is adapting to the new neural pathways, creating stronger connections with each session." Frank allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The system was exceeding even his optimistic projections, responding to Madison's determination with a level of integration he hadn't thought possible so quickly. "We need to discuss the showcase," he said, turning to Eleanor. "It's 6 weeks away now. At this rate of progress, Madison could potentially demonstrate a full walking sequence, maybe even basic dance movements." Eleanor hesitated, her maternal protectiveness warring with the evidence before her. The neural integration process shouldn't be rushed. There could be unforeseen complications. "I'm doing this," Madison stated firmly, executing another careful step. "The showcase isn't negotiable. I've already spoken with Ms. Vasquez about performing." Frank and Eleanor exchanged surprised glances. "Maria Vasquez?" Eleanor asked. "Your former ballet instructor. When did you speak with her?" "Last week," Madison replied, focusing on maintaining her balance. "She's choreographing a special piece for me, something that works with the exoskeleton's capabilities." Frank raised an eyebrow at this development. "And you didn't think to mention this to the people developing those capabilities?" Madison had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I wanted to be sure I could actually do it before getting everyone's hopes up. Ms. Vasquez understands what I'm going through. She had to reinvent her own dancing after defecting from Cuba during the Cold War. Her ankle was shattered during the escape." Eleanor seemed troubled by Madison's independent planning, but Frank found himself impressed by the girl's initiative. She wasn't passively receiving technology, she was actively shaping how it would be used. "We should meet with Ms. Vasquez," he suggested. Incorporate her choreographic requirements into the final calibration process. Madison brightened. She's actually here waiting outside. I asked her to come today. Dr. Chen laughed softly. Determined, aren't you? You have no idea, Eleanor murmured, but gestured for Madison to invite her former teacher in. Maria Vasquez entered the lab with the distinctive presence of a former principal dancer, her posture perfect despite her 68 years. Her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized sharp, intelligent features. She surveyed the technology with keen interest, but her focus quickly settled on Madison. Show me what you can do, Nina, she instructed, circling the parallel bars with a critical eye. Madison demonstrated her current capabilities, moving with growing confidence as Maria observed. The older woman nodded occasionally, her expression revealing nothing. The fluidity is coming, she commented finally, but you are still thinking too much, fighting the machine instead of dancing with it. Frank was surprised by the accuracy of her assessment. That's exactly the challenge we're working on, making the interface feel like a natural extension rather than an external device. Maria regarded him thoughtfully. You are the engineer, the one who builds this miraculous device. Frank Calloway, he confirmed with a nod. And this is Dr. Eleanor Reed, Madison's mother, and Dr. Lydia Chen, our neurological specialist. Maria acknowledged them with a regal inclination of her head. In Cuba, I danced with the National Ballet until my escape in 1980. After my injury, doctors said I would never dance again. A small, fierce smile crossed her face. I proved them wrong, as Madison will prove her doctors wrong. With all respect, Miss Vasquez, Eleanor began carefully. Madison's injury is significantly different from an ankle fracture. The neural damage is being bridged by this technology, Maria interrupted, gesturing to the exoskeleton. I have watched the videos of her progress. The movement is returning, not the same as before, perhaps, but movement with intention, with artistry. She turned to Madison. For the showcase, we will create a piece that celebrates this new way of moving, not trying to recreate what was lost, but discovering what is newly possible. The concept resonated with Frank immediately. It was exactly the approach he had taken with the technology, not mimicking normal movement, but creating something that honored the body's intentions while acknowledging its new reality. What do you envision? He asked, genuinely curious. Maria's eyes lit with creative fire. A piece that begins with limitation and culminates in liberation. Using the parallel bars as part of the choreography initially, then moving beyond them, incorporating both the wheelchair and the walking technology as instruments of the dance, not merely as medical devices. Madison was nodding enthusiastically. That's exactly what I want to show, that this isn't just about walking again. It's about finding a new way to express myself through movement. Frank glanced at Eleanor, seeing her medical concerns warring with maternal hope. The neural integration process is proceeding faster than anticipated. He reminded her gently. And the showcase is still 6 weeks away? Dr. Chen added her professional assessment. From a neurological perspective, having a specific performance goal actually enhances neural pathway development. The brain forms stronger connections when motivated by concrete objectives. Eleanor sighed, outnumbered. 6 weeks isn't much time to develop and perfect both the technology and a choreographed performance. Then we better get to work, Maria declared, clapping her hands decisively. Madison, return to first position. We begin now. As the impromptu rehearsal began, Frank pulled Eleanor aside. There's something else we need to discuss. Hayes has been quiet since the workshop attack. Too quiet. Eleanor nodded grimly. I've noticed. No interference with our research space. No questions from the board about our activities. It's concerning. He's planning something, Frank agreed. Possibly timed to coincide with the showcase. We need to be prepared. What do you suggest? Frank lowered his voice further. I've been gathering evidence on Meditech's involvement in Madison's accident and their experimental program. Carlos, my contact at the VA, has identified 7 other accidents with suspicious similarities, all involving patients who later entered Meditech's clinical trials. Eleanor's expression hardened. We need to expose them before they can harm anyone else. Agreed, but timing is crucial. If we move too soon, Hayes will shut us down and discredit our claims. If we wait too long, he left the implication hanging. The showcase, Eleanor concluded, it's the perfect opportunity, public, well-documented, with medical professionals present to validate the technology. Frank nodded. But Hayes will anticipate this. He'll have countermeasures in place. Then we need allies, Eleanor decided. People beyond his reach or influence. I'm already working on that, Frank assured her. But we'll need to be careful. Hayes has resources we can only imagine. They turned back to watch Madison, who was executing a series of small, controlled movements under Maria's exacting guidance. Despite the limitations of the prototype, there was an unmistakable grace emerging in her motion, the spirit of the dancer finding expression through new pathways. She's going to do this, isn't she? Eleanor said softly. Whether we're ready or not, Frank nodded. She's exactly like you were at that age, absolutely determined to prove the impossible possible. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. I was going to say she reminds me of you building solutions others couldn't even imagine. The unexpected compliment caught Frank off guard. In the weeks since the attack, their professional collaboration had gradually thawed the decades of personal distance between them. Working toward Madison's recovery had forged a new connection, not rekindling what was lost, but creating something different, tempered by experience and shared purpose. We should schedule a full calibration session with Maria present, Frank suggested, returning to practical matters. Integrate her choreographic vision with the technical capabilities. Eleanor agreed, already making notes on her tablet. I'll also increase security for the research space. If Hayes is planning something, he might try to access our work before the showcase. As they discussed logistics, Frank watched Madison execute another careful movement, her face lighting up when she achieved the desired position. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Hayes, Meditech, the daunting timeline, that moment of triumph made everything worthwhile. The showcase wasn't just about demonstrating technology or exposing corporate malfeasance. It was about returning possibility to a young woman who had lost more than just mobility in that deliberately staged accident. It was about justice. Yes, but more importantly, it was about hope. The St. Mercy Hospital auditorium buzzed with anticipation as attendees filed in for the Spring Dance Showcase. What had begun as a modest student performance had transformed into a significant medical event, with physicians, researchers, and media representatives joining proud parents in the audience. Backstage, Madison sat in her wheelchair, allowing Dr. Chen to perform final adjustments on the neural interface connections. The exoskeleton, now a sleek, finished product, was attached to her lower body, its carbon fiber components nearly invisible beneath the specially designed costume Maria had created. Neural response patterns are optimal, Dr. Chen reported, reviewing the diagnostic display. The system is fully calibrated to your movement intentions. Madison nodded, too focused for conversation. She had rehearsed this performance countless times over the past 6 weeks, progressing from basic movements to the complex choreography Maria had designed. Each practice session had strengthened the neural connections, improving the system's responsiveness to her intentions. Frank watched from nearby, running through his mental checklist. The technology was performing beyond expectations, adapting to Madison's neural patterns with increasing precision. The sensory feedback system provided her with proprioceptive awareness that approached normal sensation. She could feel pressure, temperature, and position through the interface. But technology was only part of today's equation. The other part involved Victor Hayes and Meditech. As anticipated, Hayes had requested a special presentation to the hospital board immediately following the showcase, ostensibly to discuss innovative mobility technologies, but clearly intended to counter whatever Frank and Eleanor planned to reveal. He's here, Eleanor reported, joining them backstage. Third row center, with two Meditech executives and their legal counsel, Frank nodded grimly. Right where we want him. Carlos is in position with the federal investigators. Back row, near the exit. Eleanor confirmed. The Justice Department representatives are with him, posing as medical journal reporters. Their plan had evolved over the past weeks, not just to demonstrate the technology, but to create an undeniable public record of its effectiveness before Hayes could interfere. The federal investigation into Meditech's human experimentation had been building quietly, gathering evidence from multiple sources, including Frank's files and testimonies from other victims Carlos had helped identify. "How are you feeling?" Eleanor asked Madison. Professional assessment mixing with maternal concern. Madison took a deep breath. Ready. Nervous. But ready. She looked up at Frank. Thank you for believing this was possible when everyone else had given up. Frank squeezed her shoulder gently. You did the hard part. I just provided the tools. Honin, Maria Vasquez approached, resplendent in a formal dress that spoke to her years as a prima ballerina. It is time. Remember, Nina, dance not as you were, but as you are now. Every movement is a victory. Every step a declaration. As the house lights dimmed, Frank and Eleanor moved to their positions in the wings. The showcase had begun with performances by current students, building toward Madison's appearance as the finale, a symbolic placement that underscored her journey from student to inspiration. The MC's voice filled the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, our final performance tonight is something truly special. Many of you know Madison Reed as one of our most promising young dancers before her accident last year. Tonight, she returns to our stage in a piece choreographed by Maria Vasquez, entitled Rebirth. A spotlight illuminated center stage, where Madison sat in her wheelchair, head bowed. The music began a haunting piano composition that spoke of loss and longing. For the first movement, Madison performed entirely from the wheelchair, her upper body and arms expressing the emotions her legs could not. Frank watched Hayes in the audience, noting his skeptical expression. The Meditech CEO clearly expected a conventional medical demonstration, not an artistic performance. The music shifted, introducing strings that suggested hope emerging from despair. Madison moved to the parallel bars that had been incorporated into the set design, transitioning from wheelchair to standing with deliberate grace. As her hands gripped the bars, the exoskeleton activated, responding to her neural commands. A murmur ran through the audience as Madison took her first supported step, then another. This was no robotic movement. Each step flowed naturally from her intention, the technology amplifying rather than controlling. Eleanor gripped Frank's arm tightly, her professional composure momentarily overcome by maternal emotion. "She's doing it," she whispered. "Really doing it." As the music built in intensity, Schultz Madison's movements became more confident. She released one hand from the support bar, extending her arm in a classical ballet position while maintaining balance. The audience's murmurs grew louder, recognition dawning that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Frank glanced again at Hayes, whose expression had transformed from skepticism to alarm. The Meditech CEO was whispering urgently to his colleagues, clearly recognizing the threat this demonstration posed to his company's technology. The performance reached its pivotal moment as the music swelled to a crescendo. Madison released to the parallel bars entirely, standing unsupported in the center stage spotlight. For a breathless moment, she held the position, then began a series of deliberate steps, walking without assistance for the first time since her injury. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, many rising to their feet in astonishment. Medical professionals in attendance were particularly vocal, recognizing the revolutionary nature of what they were witnessing. But Madison wasn't finished. As the music entered its final movement, she executed a simplified but unmistakable ballet sequence, arms and legs moving in harmony, the exoskeleton responding to her intentions with fluid precision. It wasn't the virtuosic performance she might have given before her injury, but it carried a different kind of power, the triumph of will over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As the final note sounded, Madison returned to her wheelchair, incorporating it into a concluding pose that acknowledged both her limitations and her achievements. The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming, the audience on their feet in recognition of what they had witnessed. Frank saw Hayes stand abruptly and exit the auditorium, his legal team hurrying after him. The plan was working. The public demonstration had created an undeniable record of the technology's effectiveness, one that would be difficult for Meditech to suppress or discredit. Backstage, Madison was surrounded by well-wishers, fellow dancers, medical professionals eager to understand the technology, reporters requesting interviews. Through it all, she maintained the poise of a performer, but her eyes sought out Frank and Eleanor, sharing with them the private triumph behind the public success. Dr. Chen approached, tablet in hand. "The neural response data from the performance is remarkable," she reported excitedly. "The interface achieved 94% translation accuracy of intention to movement, far beyond what any existing technology can manage." "And the sensory feedback?" Frank asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding emotional response. "Equally impressive." Madison was receiving meaningful proprioceptive data throughout the performance, essential for the balance and coordination she demonstrated. Eleanor was more direct in her reaction, embracing her daughter with fierce pride. "You were magnificent," she whispered. Madison's composure finally broke, tears of joy streaming down her face. "It felt like dancing again," she said. "Different, but real." Maria Vasquez approached, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "That, my dear, was dancing, not as before, but perhaps something more profound, dance that speaks not just of skill, but of courage." The celebration was interrupted by a hospital administrator who approached Eleanor with obvious concern. "Dr. Reed, the board chairman is requesting your immediate presence in the conference room. Dr. Hayes is making some disturbing allegations." Eleanor and Frank exchanged knowing glances. This was the confrontation they had anticipated, Hayes moving to discredit their work before it could threaten Meditech's position. "Madison, stay here with Dr. Chen and Ms. Vasquez," Eleanor instructed. "Frank and I will handle this." Madison's expression turned determined. "No, this involves me more than anyone. I'm coming too." Frank recognized the futility of arguing. "She's right. Hayes engineered her accident to create a test subject. She deserves to face him directly." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but let us handle the confrontation. Hayes is dangerous when cornered." The hospital boardroom was tense when they arrived, with Hayes standing at the head of the table addressing the assembled board members. He paused mid-sentence as they entered, his expression hardening at the sight of Frank. "Ah, the collaborators arrive," he said with false joviality. "I was just explaining to the board how you've been conducting unauthorized human experimentation in violation of hospital protocols and federal regulations." Eleanor stepped forward, her professional authority evident in her posture. "That's a serious accusation. Dr. Hayes, particularly coming from someone whose company deliberately caused my daughter's accident to create a test subject for their own experimental technology." A shocked murmur ran through the board members. Hayes's face flushed with anger. "A preposterous allegation," he snapped. "The girl's accident was thoroughly investigated. The bus driver suffered a medical emergency." "A conveniently timed medical emergency," Frank interjected, "following a substantial deposit to his offshore account from a shell company linked to Meditech subsidiaries." Hayes turned to the board chairman. "This is absurd. They're making wild accusations to distract from their own ethical violations." The chairman, clearly uncomfortable, looked to Eleanor. "Dr. Reed, these are extraordinary claims. Do you have evidence to support them?" "Substantial evidence," Eleanor confirmed, "which has been provided to federal investigators. In fact," she glanced toward the doorway, where Carlos Diaz had appeared in his wheelchair, accompanied by two serious-looking individuals in dark suits. "Victor Hayes," the female agent announced, displaying credentials. "I'm Special Agent Ramirez with the Justice Department. We have a warrant to seize Meditech records related to the unauthorized human experimentation program, codenamed Neural Pathway. Hayes's composure cracked visibly. This is harassment. My attorneys will... Your attorneys are already being served with subpoenas. Agent Ramirez interrupted. We have testimony from 7 victims of staged accidents who were subsequently enrolled in Meditech's experimental program without proper informed consent. The board members watched in stunned silence as the federal agents presented Hayes with legal documents. The Meditech CEO's face had gone from flushed to ashen. This technology is proprietary, he insisted, gesturing toward Madison. What you demonstrated today infringes on Meditech patents and intellectual property. Frank stepped forward. Actually, the neural interface technology originated in the Artemis project work that James Woodward and I developed before his death, work that was never properly patented by NASA or legally transferred to Meditech. Madison wheeled closer to Hayes, meeting his gaze directly. You had someone crash a bus to break my spine, she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the accusation. You watched me struggle through rehabilitation, knowing all along it was your company that put me in this wheelchair. Hayes's expression confirmed the truth more clearly than any evidence could have. For a moment, the calculating businessman facade slipped, revealing the ruthless pragmatist beneath. Advancements require sacrifice, he said coldly. The technology we're developing will help thousands. What's one injury compared to that? It wasn't yours to decide, Madison replied simply. My life, my body, my choice. The federal agents moved to escort Hayes from the room, but he turned back for a final shot at Frank. You think you've won? This will be tied up in courts for years, and your miracle technology without proper backing and regulatory approval, it will never reach the market. Frank merely smiled. That's where you're wrong. Victor, the demonstration today wasn't just for the audience, it was live-streamed to medical conferences in 3 countries. The technology speaks for itself, and it's already being recognized for what it is, a genuine advancement, not a corporate profit center. As Hayes was led away, the board chairman turned to Eleanor with grave concern. Dr. Reed, the hospital's reputation will be enhanced. Eleanor finished for him. By being associated with groundbreaking medical technology developed within these walls, technology that will be licensed on a nonprofit basis to ensure accessibility for all patients who need it, not just those who can afford Meditech's price tag. The meeting dissolved into urgent discussions among board members, but Frank, Eleanor, and Madison quietly withdrew, their primary mission accomplished. In the corridor outside, Carlos waited with Maria Vasquez, both wearing expressions of satisfaction. The Justice Department had been building a case for months, Carlos explained. Your evidence was the final piece they needed to move forward. Madison looked at the assembled group, the unlikely alliance that had made her recovery possible. What happens now, she asked, with the technology? I mean, Frank and Eleanor exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. That depends partly on you, Frank said. The neural interface system was developed specifically for your needs, but it could help many others with similar injuries. I want that, Madison said immediately. I want everyone to have this chance, not just people who can afford it. Eleanor smiled proudly at her daughter. Then we'll make that happen. Dr. Chen has already proposed establishing a dedicated research unit to continue developing the technology. Maria added her perspective. And I would be honored to develop a movement therapy program incorporating the technology, dance as rehabilitation, as expression, as healing. As they discussed possibilities, Frank found himself watching Eleanor, seeing in her animated expression the same passion for helping others that had drawn him to her decades ago. The circumstances that had brought them back into each other's lives were tragic, but the outcome was something neither could have anticipated. There's one more thing, Frank said as the conversation paused. The showcase performance demonstrated what's possible, but it's just the beginning. The neural interface technology can be refined further, potentially offering even greater mobility and sensation. Madison's eyes lit up. You mean I could dance more like before? Not exactly like before, Frank cautioned, but with continued development, the range of movement and responsive capability could expand significantly. Count me in, Madison declared. As your primary test subject and advocate, Eleanor laughed softly. I don't think we could stop you if we tried. As they made their way back toward the auditorium, where well-wishers and medical professionals still waited to speak with Madison, Frank fell into step beside Eleanor. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing this was possible, for not giving up on Madison when everyone else had. Frank shook his head. Madison did the hard work, and you were the one who sought me out, despite our history. Speaking of history, Eleanor ventured, glancing at him sideways. Perhaps we could revisit some of ours. The less complicated parts. The invitation surprised him, but not unpleasantly. I'd like that, Frank admitted. Though I warn you, I'm even more stubborn and set in my ways than I was at 30. Eleanor's smile was warm with memory and new possibility. Some things never change, though I might be slightly less convinced of my own infallibility these days. Ahead of them, Madison was demonstrating a movement to Maria and Dr. Chen, the exoskeleton responding to her intentions with fluid precision. The technology wasn't perfect yet. There would be years of refinement ahead, but it had already achieved what once seemed impossible, giving a dancer back her ability to express herself through movement. For Frank, watching Madison's determined progress, the technology represented something beyond scientific achievement. It was redemption for the work he and James had begun decades earlier, work meant to enhance human capability, rather than exploit it for profit or weaponize it for power. James would have been proud, he said softly, almost to himself. Eleanor heard him nevertheless. Yes, she agreed, understanding the weight of that legacy. And Martha too, I think. Frank nodded, touched by her recognition of his late wife's contribution to the work. Martha always said the most important technology was the kind that helped people express their true selves. As Madison executed another careful movement, her face alight with the joy of reclaimed possibility, Frank knew that was exactly what they had created, not just a mobility device, but a bridge between intention and expression, between what was lost and what could be reclaimed. The future stretched before them with new purpose, refining the technology, making it available to others who needed it, continuing the work that had unexpectedly brought them back together. There would be challenges ahead, regulatory hurdles, Meditech's inevitable legal counterattacks, the complex process of further developing the neural interface system. But watching Madison truly dance, with all the emotion and intention that defined the art, Frank knew those challenges were worth facing. Some journeys, once begun, simply had to be completed, no matter the obstacles along the way. This was one such journey, not just for Madison, but for all of them. A journey of healing, of justice, and ultimately, of hope. Ready for what comes next? Eleanor asked, sensing his thoughts. Frank smiled, feeling younger than he had in years. Absolutely. Let's dance. The measure of a life isn't found in victories untarnished, but in the battles that leave scars worth bearing. For Frank Calloway, redemption didn't come through erasing the past, but by transforming its lessons into something that could heal. For Madison Reed, strength revealed itself not in regaining what was lost, but in discovering what remained possible when everything seemed broken. They began as strangers, an aging engineer, haunted by failure, and a young dancer robbed of her future, both casualties of a world where innovation too often serves profit over people. Yet in the space between despair and determination, they found something science couldn't quantify: the stubborn resilience of the human spirit. The technology that gave Madison back her movement wasn't perfect. Neither was the justice that finally caught up with those who had orchestrated her suffering. Some wounds never fully heal. Some losses can never be reclaimed. But in the quiet moments after the spotlight fades, when a former dancer executes a movement once thought impossible, when old enemies find unexpected common ground, we're reminded of what truly matters. Perhaps that's the most profound leap of all, not the one that carries us over obstacles, but the one that teaches us to trust again when falling seems certain. In a world of calculated risks, what would you risk everything to reclaim?